Hi, Christine. Welcome to the Radical Therapist podcast.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and thanks for making the time. And I'm really excited to be in conversation with you today. We get to talk about one of my favorite topics these days, liminal space and
Yeah.
traversing liminal space in all the different ways. And I guess I maybe want to start my first question with what are some of your theoretical influences when it comes to liminal space, and how has Michael White's perspective on the three phases of separation, liminality, and reincorporation influenced your approach to therapy?
Okay. Well, I think that my understanding of liminal space is fairly new because it's only since I've been working with psychedelics that this idea of liminality really has been what I've been reading about, what I've been learning about. And in hindsight, I've always been working in liminal space because I've been working with teens. I used to work at Peak House as a therapist at a treatment center for substance misuse, where young people would come to sort of get their lives back from drugs and alcohol and with disordered eating. And so, in those, like working with those problems, when people are stopping using something and trying to get to the new place, they're in liminal space. But I don't think I had the words for that then. What we talked about was sort of the trans theoretical model of change. So the phases of change that people went through, which also, again, includes liminal space, but the name wasn't given to it. And so I think one of the theoretical influences, and this might sound silly, is sort of Dr. Seuss and his idea of the waiting space, in Oh, the Places You'll Go. And so we did a lot of talking, and I still use that idea now with clients who are trying to free themselves from any kind of problem, is this idea of this waiting where you are and you're kind of in betwixt in between places, and and how you can sit through those places, and how you can get comfortable in the unknowingness and the betweenness of places. And so, in starting to work with psychedelics, which I've been doing now for about 3 years, then you start to get introduced to concepts of liminality. And it becomes really apparent when you do psychedelics or when you're working with clients, this sort of thrust into this new way of being and trying to understand it. And so, starting to write about psychedelics and narrative therapy is when I came across Michael White's article about working with substance misuse and helping people find new identities. And that's when I came across his ideas of separation, liminality, um, and integration, reincorporation. And then the idea that he borrowed from like Van Gennep and Turner. And so building on those ideas. And so now it's around, yeah, exactly. I have that book, but mine's an older copy that I had to find on eBay somewhere. Yeah. Yeah. And so now I think I'm really thinking through, like, integration is a really big word that's used in psychedelics, but it's also a practice that I think we use when we're trying to figure out how to rejig our way through life, and how we try to like change things and change our ideas, and how do we have those ideas fit into our next steps as we're moving forward in life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that's been kind of similar to my experience too, of like just once getting introduced to the ideas, and then just seeing it everywhere once you get introduced to
Yeah.
ideas, right? And then I think so much of on my Instagram page, I call myself a liminal space tour guide, right? Because I think so much of what therapy is that, right? Of
Yeah.
walking alongside folks who are either at a threshold or in some sort of uncertainty space or that kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was a woman that we were working with in a psychedelic program, and she was just having a really hard time. And she said something that you wanted to fix it. You wanted to take the pain away. And she said at the end of what she had said, she was like, and I'm not going to tie this up in a bow for everybody. Like, basically, this is where I'm at, and I'm not going to make it sound pretty, and I'm not going to say I'm okay. And so I think a lot of the liminal space work is just really recognizing what a difficult space it is, and how often just holding space for people in that space is all you can do,
Right.
right?
Absolutely. Okay. Can you describe some of the typical events that might lead to individuals entering separation phase or thresholds in therapeutic contexts?
Yeah, I think it depends. Like, if we're talking about psychedelics, then if someone's coming to see me and they've applied for a Health Canada exemption to be able to legally use psilocybin for the treatment of refractory depression because they've gone through 3 other trials of antidepressants that haven't worked for them, then they're entering therapy trying to separate from something. And the separation is trying to separate from the grips and the depth of despair and the hold that depression has on them. Um, and and then the work is around helping someone prepare to separate. What's the sense of the territory that they might be entering into as they imagine like trying to unravel the talons of depression from themselves. And if you're say working with someone for disordered eating or drug and alcohol, substance use, I think then that separation phase is like they're at a place in their life where they're recognizing just how much space and energy the problem is taking up in their life, and that they no longer are running the show in their lives, and instead the problem is sort of bigger than they are. And at that point, I think people come to us because they're just like, this is no longer working. This isn't sustainable.
Right. And how does one recognize they're at a threshold or separation phase? Are there specific signs or experiences that you look for?
Well, I think that it would, like, again, if it's someone coming for um, treatment for, say, psychedelic work, they are just really clear about there's something in their life that isn't working. And they have maybe tried everything. They've tried meditation, they've tried yoga, they've tried all the things to try to get them to that next place. And they've been unable to do it. A woman I was working, a therapist, she talked about how in order for her to actually do the work of yoga and meditation, she needed to do psychedelics because she actually needed to have her nervous system like rest. And psychedelics are sort of anti-inflammatory. So it wasn't until she was able to enter a stage of rest that she was actually able to like be calm enough to meditate, to do yoga, to do the things that she wanted to be doing in therapy for a really long time. So I think the things that you look for in terms of the separation phase and when they're ready to trip over to the next stage is sort of a sense of readiness, a sense of preparedness. Working with people with disordered eating, I think it's really important to have a sense of what might show up afterwards. Like, how might this problem not want to let go of people? And if this problem starts to realize that it's maybe losing its hold on you, what do you think it might do? What are the thoughts? What are the thinkings? Who are the people that it might try to entice you to be around so that it doesn't lose its hold on you?
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I guess my next question is, what role do you imagine therapy or narrative therapy plays in supporting someone contemplating breaking away? Kind of standing at the threshold, and
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Well, I think as people hear themselves speak, they get a sense of what they stand for. And I think in hearing what they stand for, there's often a real contradiction between the ways in which they're living and acting in the world and the way the problem has them living and acting, and then the ways in which their values, their hopes, their preferences for their life are maybe in different places. And I think it's that tension that really supports people, like in hearing those ideas, that's the place that helps people get to the place of like really wanting to start to make a change. And I think sometimes that we don't know often, we can sort of make excuses to ourselves and sort of explain things. It's okay, it's not that bad. And I think then as you start to hear yourself speak, you might allow yourself to recognize just how hard or just how painful or just how much work this has actually been.
mhm.
And then I think that's where the work really starts to gain some momentum.
Yeah, the scaffolding in too, so to
Yeah,
speak. Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
how do you, or do you, explain the concept of liminality to your clients? What do you think is important for folks to understand about this journey?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to know where you're going to get thrown into. Because if you're working with alternate, like consciousness, states of consciousness,
Hmm.
I think you really need to prepare people in terms of where they're going so that they don't just get thrown into a black abyss, which I think can be more therapeutically harmful than therapeutically beneficial. So I think talking about this idea of like this threshold, that it's sort of this doorway that you can enter into, using ideas of Dr. Seuss. I've actually like read the book to people, the waiting for a train to come, a train to go, waiting for your hair to grow. Um, so
Great
I
book, by
think
the way,
that
everybody listening. Somebody gave it to me as a gift too, so I really appreciate
it's,
it.
I know Dr. Seuss has a lot to say. So yeah, I think it's around like this idea of it's around the preparation so that people have a sense of knowing what might be coming so that they don't get stuck in this idea that they've done something wrong, and that in the I've done something wrong, there's no hope for me, nothing's going to change. I think that in helping people have a sense of the difficulties that might lie ahead, and they might not lie ahead, but if they do, then they're ready for them, and they don't then think I'm a failure, I might as well just give up. Like I think that if we don't name the difficulties, then the problem can take advantage of those difficulties and really get people back.
Yeah, so you're talking about like, and this is something I'm also interested in, like predictions of experiences. I think Michael White called them of, helping folks have some sense of what they might confront as they're
Yeah,
entering the liminal space, and that's kind of what you're talking about, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that liminal space, it's like around psychedelics, like just being known you're going to be thrown somewhere, and knowing that in the like you might end up somewhere that's really difficult, or you might end up with somewhere where just like your experience of the problem and your experience on the mat, you're a changed person, something's different,
Hmm.
something's happened. But yeah, if you don't, I think if you're not ready for what you may or may like what you might encounter, that you just it can be a difficult place to be.
Yeah, and I think often what gets characterized as relapse or self-sabotage, I've always said, is just kind of maybe a turning back in the known to the known and familiar, right?
Hmm.
And that maybe we didn't do enough work of predictions of experiences that people might have
Yeah,
going out,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
great. What practices might you use or are most effective in helping people navigate the confusion and disorientation of liminal space, which oftentimes is the disorientation of just confronting uncertainty?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's around helping people be in the moment and helping people be with their breath, helping people go slow, um, helping people not think too far. Like I think if they're too far ahead, then it's just like future disaster thinking potentially. And if they're too far back, it's that black hole negative thinking that isn't useful. So I think it's really helping people tolerate the sensations that they're currently experiencing in their body, helping them figure out ways to sort of navigate those thoughts, navigate the feelings, to be with those feelings. I think often when people are leaving really big problems, those problems feel really big in their bodies as well, and or they don't have the same tools and strategies to tolerate those feelings because they're not available to them because they're trying to stay free from drugs and alcohol. They're trying to like have a different relationship with food or with sadness. And so I think it's around helping people learn new strategies and new ways of being with themselves that are going to support them in like holding on to this freedom from whatever problem they're trying to break themselves from.
Great, wonderful. Um, I'm sure you experience people having experiences of despair within liminal space. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering, what approaches do you find most helpful in providing relief or perspective or something I really appreciate, like an ongoingness, like an ability, like this ongoingness?
Yeah. I think part of it is like just really helping people be compassionate
Yeah.
with themselves. That real dear other, that people are so gentle and kind to others. And so asking themselves the same kind of advice they might give to a loving sister or brother, like what would they tell themselves in those moments? Um, rereading therapeutic letters. Like I really like to write therapeutic letters to
You
people. I
do.
write there. I do. I find that it can help save you if you feel like you haven't asked the right questions in a therapy session. And you get to sort of not rewrite the therapy session, but you get to ask the questions that you maybe were really curious about afterwards.
Right.
I think that even after a medicine session, that writing a therapeutic letter in terms of what you witnessed and what you saw and your curiosities about what those things were. Um, so if people are resourced with like letters, if they're resourced with their own words, the things that they said in therapy, their hopes, their intentions for themselves, I think that can help them sort of have something to hold on to so that they're not like out there. It's like, what can we do to ground ourselves? How do we get your feet on the ground? How do we feel like you're not untethered? And I think that's in the liminal space, you can often feel like you don't have anywhere you're not grounded, right? So I think our work as therapists is helping people feel like they actually are grounded in the world. Even though everything is different, they can stand solid.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe moving to the reincorporation stage. As you work with people that are kind of beginning to reincorporate into their lives, how does what are your experiences of how does their perception of the world change? What kind of new experiences do they typically experience? What's that like?
Well, it's been really interesting because I've done a lot of work with people with like who've really experienced big problems of depression. And I've been working as a therapist for 20 years. Psychedelics really offers people a sense of compassion
Hmm.
that they are then able to hold on to, and that sense of just a gentleness and a different vision or different way of seeing their problem or their life really allows them to go forward in a different way that I don't think they ever would have believed or imagined possible for themselves, in terms of just the sensitivity and sort of the grace that they're offering themselves. They're like, I'm human and this is okay.
Hmm. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what practices can therapists take to support continuity and sustainability post therapy? Because I'm sure, I don't know, I don't do psychedelic therapy, but I do other therapies. But
Yeah.
what are some of the practices you might use, both, psychedelic, non-psychedelic therapy for, kind of post-therapy work to sustain, any kind of work that you've done?
Well, I think that what psychedelics can offer people is it helps people externalize the problem.
Mm.
So that's where I think narrative and psychedelics, they fit so beautifully together, because the problem, they can often see it in an entirely different way, or they have a different sense or a different understanding of the problem. So, for example, I was working with a woman and she watched herself digging a grave, and she had experienced a lot of losses and a lot of deaths in her community. And she sort of remembers thinking, what, like, who's died now? Like another death, another loss. And then she said that she realized that she was actually digging a grave for the beliefs and the ideas that no longer served her.
Mm.
And so then the work in the sort of integration phase is, what are the beliefs that were no longer serving her? What are the beliefs that um, have been sort of laid to rest? And where is she wanting to be walking? What are the beliefs that are going to be serving her? And that's often connecting it back to the preparation work that we've done with someone, where they're beginning to separate. You might find that, like, in reaching back, those were some of their intentions, were around stepping from some of those ideas, and they really showed up in a literal way during a medicine session.
Mm.
So it's holding on to those ways. Another man, he found his experience of depression. He kind of had this idea of depression was just taking up unwanted space in his head, like an unpaying roommate,
Mm.
you know, and that he was going to kick this roommate out. It was not good for anything. It was just taking up space. There was other things he wanted to fill his life up with. So I think it's around like working with what shows up, and then grounding those practices in real tangible acts. You know, a lot of times people want to start a meditation practice. Hopefully, they've started one before we've done some of the work together, but even just 5 minutes of sitting, breathing, calm, um, really to help people sort of solidify a new way of moving forward.
That's great. Where do you see your work going, with the challenges and opportunities, and where are you headed?
Well, I really love this work. Like, I really, I think that the shifts that can happen in the medicine work, if people are really prepared for it, can be like quite significant. So I would like to continue to do this work. I think that right now Health Canada is letting people apply for um, like medical psilocybin sits. So I think that I'm just going to keep doing this work and just kind of going slowly because I'm new to the work. So I really just want to be careful and cautious and yeah, just keep having more conversations. And I think that in working with people, like having these styles of conversations, it starts to like overflow into all of your other therapy work.
Sure.
So I think my other therapy work, I have a lot more, there's a lot more slowness. There's a lot of like checking in with like what's happening in terms of your body. What are the emotions that are showing up? How can they ground themselves? Those types of things. So I think it's actually shifting how I'm working in my actual other therapy practice right now too.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. I like to ask all my guests a particular question, when we come to the end here, and
Mm.
that's what books or films or ideas, music, what's capturing your attention these days? What's inspiring you?
That's inspiring me. Well, again, it's this idea of the body work. Like I was just rereading Jeff Zimmerman's book,
Hmm.
Neuronarrative Therapy.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of Dan Siegel stuff around like the river of awareness and like being able to sort of stay in that like flow zone. Um, and and yes, the working with sensations in some of the psychedelic work, there seems to be a release that's happening of like big feelings, like emotions are showing up that belong to the past, that's allowing them to move forward in a different way in the future. So I'm really curious around like the kind of conversations we can have that allow people to access those things so that they can sort of have them not impact them in the future. So yeah, helping people access that pause. So it's a lot of like mindfulness style
Okay.
work that I'm kind of getting into right now.
And do you have a meditation practice yourself, or?
I I am a mover and I have a hard time sitting. So I am better at doing like a moving meditation like yoga. So that's what I do. I try to get myself on a yoga mat and like even just for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then I do with my kids, I try to do a lot of like 4-7-8 breath
Hmm.
and those type, just like slowing all of us down. But I'm busy, so I have all of the things that I need to put into place for a meditation practice, and I just need to do it. I've got my mat, I've got my bolster.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It'll find its place.
it'll find its place.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
All right. And just so for the listeners, you're presenting at the Vancouver Narrative Conference.
yeah, yeah. I'm presenting on psychedelics and narrative therapy, and I hope to present like sort of the map around how do we work, like how can narrative therapy be incorporated into psychedelics, ideas of letter writing, um, yeah, how can we really like hold on to the changes that have happened in sort of this liminal space
Yeah. Hmm.
and shift those into someone's life as they're sort of trying to move and free themselves from
What
problems.
are the dates again? I know it's in the fall, but
It is, I think it's November like 8th, 9th, and 10th, or 7th, 8th, and 9th. I think it's the long weekend around the Remembrance Day long weekend in Canada.
got it. Okay. And if people want to find you, how do people find you?
Well, they can find me. Where would you find me? I W like on ChristineDennstedt.com, or I'm on Instagram. I think I'm at Christine Dennstedt Therapy on Instagram.
Okay. And I'll
Yeah.
provide links for in the show notes for folks to do that. And Christine, I want to thank you very much for coming on and sharing with me your work and your practice and ideas. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks.